So I'm Mark Seide. This is Emily Standers. Stephanie cannot be here today for medical reasons, but she was also part of putting the presentation together. So hopefully you're here to talk about writing, or else you just wasted 20 minutes of your time. So we're going to start with what drives these errors that we see in students write. Pardon me.
So I'm already going to interrupt you because that's what we do.
Yeah.
Is we're going to go through, we have obviously the PowerPoint, and so we'll go through sort of our talk about the sort of theory behind things as well as our approaches to things, and then we're going to leave most of the time for discussion of your particular issues, our suggestions as well as your own for how to address them. So that's our plan for today.
And if we, have a frustration that we haven't addressed, that's fine. We don't have all the answers, we might have some. Okay, so what is writing? Writing requires the active organization of personal understanding of materials. What does that really mean? It means that writing, students have to make meaning for themselves out of whatever the content is. So as they do that, things happen in the brain. We'll get to that one. I'll just leave it to read the quote. Most of our students aren't avid readers. Because they aren't avid readers, they don't have that ingrained sense of how language works. And even if they were avid readers in high school, they weren't reading the stuff that would give them the idioms, constructions, tropes, and all that good stuff. They would let them write like they do in academic articles. But that is a leg up if they are good readers. Students come to the university, I'll just leave you to read that one too. So the strains, this goes back to that other slide, strains on their cognitive and linguistic resources means the number of mechanical and grammatical errors goes up, which simply means that when they're organizing their personal understanding, they're working on the high level detail, which means that if you want to consider grammar, which we all know it's important, so it's really not low level, but that's what goes first. In order to understand a topic, they have to work through those issues, and when they're working through those issues, grammatical mistakes are going to go up.
So oftentimes we hear, oh, but they already know this, right? Why is their grammar so bad when clearly they've been taught or they knew it or they did okay on the last one? The harder they're having to think about what they're figuring out in writing, the more likely they are to make errors in the mechanical things that they've already mastered, because their brain is dedicating energy to understanding and processing rather than paying attention to those small, quote-unquote, details.
Are you sure they've already mastered it?
No.
That's what I was
right.
What are they coming in to you with?
Hard to say. Because we get the range. We get the range of students who have vast supplies of knowledge, who are readers, and so have an innate understanding. We have those who were strictly instructed. We have those who weren't. I mean, there's no way to predict what their level is at all, ever, I think.
It's depressing.
Yeah.
It can be.
All right. So this is a model this woman came up with. It gives you the 5 areas that are part of writing expertise. So you have to know how to, writing process knowledge is how to get something done, how to get from a draft or an idea to the finished product. I would say our students are pretty good with that one. It's at least a superficial level when they come to UT Tyler. Subject matter knowledge, nope. It's really interesting when you go to conferences and whoops, I don't want to do that. Oh, man.
Yeah,
Just click on the X in the top right corner.
We need an executive order to take that out.
Yes, we do.
Top right corner.
No, of the sign-in, where it says sign-in,
right
right there. And then just click resume in the little gray box.
Thank you.
There you go.
Where was subject matter knowledge? Okay, yeah. So, like, if you people from Carnegie Mellon, they just have a leg up on us in places like that. Their students already have, well, it seems like what they say, a great deal of subject matter knowledge, or at least subject matter awareness. Like if they're an engineering student, they kind of know what engineering entails. They know what it means to be an engineer. They kind of know what it means to think like an engineer. I think our students are less along that line, or less along that path than some of the students at other universities. Genre knowledge, genre just means type. What are the conventions of a particular genre? So And do you use first person, second person? Do you use subheadings, not use subheadings, that kind of stuff? Rhetorical knowledge means how do you get something across to your reader? And then discourse community knowledge. What do people within a particular discourse community accept as knowledge? What do they accept as discourse conventions? Those 5 areas. Emily, you want to say something about that?
So students have a hard time, again, this is, to be truly successful writers, they have to have all 5 areas working together. And that's rough, right? Additionally, we know that students who are novice writers want to make hard and fast rules, right? So I never write in first person, or I always write in first person, or they're always in never thinkers about writing. And those are the I's and U's are the simple ones to point out, but they have a very hard time shifting the genre knowledge, right, from a literature review to an analysis to a summary. So they have they want one rule that's going to take care of everything. And even when we tell them that doesn't work, they tend to apply that one rule they've made up. So that's another of the struggles that we face, is that they want that rule, they want it hard and fast, and they want to apply it everywhere. And so they may have some process knowledge, as Mark said, they may have some discourse community knowledge or some subject matter, especially as they get into their junior and senior year, right? We hope they're starting to have some subject matter knowledge. But pulling them all together to have that successful piece of writing is a hugely challenging task for them. So that's one of the reasons we have so many troubles, is that pulling them all together at the same time when they want one rule is.
Senior writing is monolithic,
Yes.
instead of multifaceted.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so one way to start bridging from where they're at to where we would like them to be, low stakes writing. And we start with an overall thought about reflection, which I'll let you read. You can look at Bean, any of the books on learning. Reflection's an integral part of learning. So if they're just writing an assignment, but they're not reflecting on this stuff, then that's probably not going to impact their learning that greatly. Whereas if they are reflecting on it, hopefully that does have a more significant impact on their learning.
Now, are you going to talk about how you grade reflections
Yes.
in this? Okay.
Yes. And remember, the reflection is not, as it says, it's not personal writing and just, I like this, I didn't like this, right? We all find those annoying and we don't want to grade them. That's not what this is about. It's about, I understood, so the concept I taught was the concept of audience awareness. I'll use for my example, for my classes. This is what it means to be aware of an audience, and this is how I put it into my paper. Right? So we can see, so they're having to process that, both what the information is as well as how they use it, rather than, I think being aware of audience is dumb because I'm just writing to the teacher, right? So we're not looking for their personal reactions, we're looking for their understandings of the material rather than, and that's relatively easy to grade as well, right? Of, you got it, you didn't.
Yep.
I'm going
So
to
that's
follow
what
up
we
on
mean by
that. I'm a writer, and I'm in a writing group, and I do workshops every so often. Older people in their 50s and 60s that have started to write will say very often, the reason I didn't write in high school was because I hated it. It was an assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And it had nothing to do with me personally. It wasn't my story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's interesting because when you allow students to personalize their writing, I think you do generate more interest and engagement.
Okay, personalized can be, right, my story, my interaction with the material, or can it be like, I want to teach math. So if I'm writing papers about math, that's going to be more invested than writing papers about English, right? So the personal, again, it doesn't have to be, a lot of us shy away from, I don't want to hear your story in a scholarly paper. Well, of course, that's not necessarily what we're encouraging, although that does have room for, like, there are places for that. But that personal interest writ large rather than writ narrow.
And also, it's an interesting point. Right, when you're in high school, what do they teach you mostly? Follow the rules. And writing's kind of an imposition, something done to you. Well, how do you avoid that? How do you teach someone who wants to be a professional how to write like a professional without telling them this is what you got to do. You can't just be, it's not a free-for-all. The people you're working with, what kind of types of writing are they doing? What types of writing are they doing?
And you're writing.
For a lot of them, at their age, it's personal memoir.
Right, so that's...
It's not academic. I mean, they're not writing papers for a science journal. They're retired. Some of the people I met through Julie and work in healthcare for assisted living facilities, they're just having a good time. I mean, they're trying to tell their stories and they're writing them. And there's no pressure, obviously, they're not going to get graded. But it is very productive for them. And that's a challenge for us when we're teaching younger people who exactly need to learn how to write professionally, and use correct grammar and all of that stuff. And that's the challenge.
Hopefully you have some ideas. Okay. Opportunities for informal feedback before grading formally, which may address your question a little bit, which is just taken from the How Learning Works book. So, the 3 steps of metacognition are essentially what we're talking about here and back up here with reflection. First step of metacognition, plan. Second step, monitor as you're working along. Third step, evaluate when you get the finished product. Evaluate when you get the finished product is essentially the reflection. So what did I do well? What could I do better? What did I learn about it? You want to say something about that? I think this was Stephanie's slide. So Stephanie would have a lot more to say about
A lot more to
this.
say about this. Yes, it's not my graphic.
Yeah, mine either. So I'm not sure what she wanted us to get out of that.
So the idea of what is your goal as you assign writing determines everything else. So I think that that's a big part of this sort of wheel, and that there's opportunities to do, as it says, targeted feedback. So that's one of the tricks to grading more efficiently is to say I'm only going to comment on X and Y. So I'm picking those 2 things. So that's that targeted feedback, and then they go practice that, and then the next time you maybe have a different targeted feedback. So you as a grader are not grading everything all at once, and they as a learner are not trying to learn everything all at once. I think that that's an important
How do you
process.
balance that if it's not the same assignment every time? So I could see how that would work if I asked for you to write an assignment and we work through 3 different drafts. But if I'm asking someone to write it's way too personal, right? But the idea of legislative history on one and an election analysis in another paper, and maybe I'm speaking to something about their writing, but I've actually asked them to write different papers.
So that would be where you would have a grading rubric. So you would say, these are the things that I'm going to focus on. And you tell them that straight from the beginning. So I'm going to grade, I'm going to comment on, I don't know, understanding of the laws, as well as your application to whatever. So, and then in the next you're going to say, well, I'm not going to comment on, but I'm expecting to see this application here. So referencing.
Okay.
So I'm going to grade on it. It's going to be factored in, but I'm not going to comment on it unless you come and speak with me individually.
The expectation.
All right, different types of low stakes writing. So low stakes means it's not going to be graded that heavily. It's not a formal paper. So comprehension type activities, guided note taking, comprehension questions, summarizing, like give them 5 minutes at the end of class to say summarize what we talked about in class today. Analytic responses to a question you may ask, response to questions that were asked during class on a particular day. Excuse me. And other ones. Again, metacognition, plan, monitor, then assess or evaluate. Process analyses. What steps did you take to get this project done? Did those steps work for you? Did they not? What would you do different next time? Case studies, all sorts of cool stuff.
So you see a case study as a low stakes?
It depends on how you're using it, right? So it absolutely can be high stakes in terms of.
Right, a case study for a particular discipline might be their main project, but it could also be an informal writing that gets students to help think about something. Well, obviously they're both going to get them to think about something.
So it could be, right, so your legislative analysis could be a legislative history, could be, right, so that could be seen as a case study, right? Because you're looking at a particular law and how it came to be. So that could be a huge high stakes process, or it could be you could take everyone pick one law, and as we go through different theories of understanding, apply that to your law. So that would be a low stakes one where you're sort of playing with how different things impact that one So it's all about how it's used in the course.
Right.
And that would be great scaffolding for the final bigger project, which we'll talk about that in a minute.
So like Emily talked about, journals are not, I liked it, I didn't like it. It's, responding to a reading, maybe probably with specific questions. Just thinking about different ideas. The whole goal of low stakes writing is to get them not focused on polished prose at this point, because again, we know that they need to learn stuff before they need to learn the content before their prose is going to get as polished as it can be. So you want to use low stakes writing to get them into the subject.
And we all know that writing is a muscle, right? The more you use it, the stronger it is. So even if they're not writing the more they write for these little things that count for almost nothing, or
Which is scaffolding.
aren't necessarily highly graded or graded on completion, the better they are when it comes to the important stuff, because they're in the practice of doing it. And that's what I tell my students. They're like, you're just busy. This is busy work. You're making us write. I said, no, the fact that you're sitting here and making your brain work and communicate with your fingers and put these words down is helping you, even if it's not a one-to-one link.
So with your assignments, that's what I think Emily's getting at too, is the scaffolding is, let's break that down into smaller chunks and have it be informal. We're giving formative comment. The formative commentary would be, is there thinking on this project moving in the direction you want it to be? So alleviates you from focusing on, is there prose at the level you want it to be? Is there thinking the way you want it to be? Or at least headed in that direction. Okay, so then the benefits, which you've gone over a couple.
I started journals in Screen, and I hadn't used them before because I thought, that sounded like a lot of grading, a lot more than what I was doing. But my students really struggle with learning the science concepts, and you'd think they'd come in with some of it, but they really don't come in with it. And so to get them to read about science is somewhat tedious. And so when I started using journals and kind of had reflective kinds of questions about the content that they had to read, really low stakes, like 10 points a week, I found that they learned a lot better and they began to write a lot better, because as long as I gave them a little bit of feedback, the writing got better and better. And so it did help that learning process, just that little journal writing prompts.
So I think you verified that guy's quote. Most people's quote. Excellent.
Yeah.
And as you said you had to do some feedback, right? Was it hugely taxing?
No, because I just went in and said, that's a great idea, just little comments to let them know that I was actually reading those, and making sure they were on the right page, so they actually had read. But they were, I'm talking like maybe a paragraph or two, real short. I gave them the questions, but they were somewhat reflective about, looking at this exercise that this person did. How do you feel about that? Would you be able to do something like that? Why or why not? Those kinds of questions.
Right, because one of the things students say often don't have content knowledge, they don't have syntax knowledge, but they also don't know what it means to think like someone within a discipline. So that's what you're trying to get them to do, is think like someone within a specific discipline. And that's where the informal or low stakes writing really comes in handy. So we talked about chunks. Opportunity to get forward-looking feedback. Again, just is what you're doing, what you could do,
And I find, and I know Mark is the same, we do portfolios, right? So they have scaffolded steps along the way, and we look at them along the way. So we look at an early draft, and maybe a mid-draft, and then a final draft. The final draft grading takes about 2 minutes, because you've seen it so much in the process that you don't have to do a lot of time. Now it takes more time in between, right? But it's not as if you're doing the same amount of grading. You do the same amount of grading spread over 3 sessions instead of in 1 session. And that's really an important thing to remember. You don't have to save it all. You don't have to binge it at the end of the semester, right? You can.
I guess my struggle is the grammar so bad sometimes. And you're grading those journals and you're grading those reflections. It's like, do you look at the big picture, or do you, I try to do rubrics on the reflections, but just the grammar is so bad.
Right. But the thing of it is, in a journal, they should be allowed to explore their thinking. And if they're trying to focus on their grammar, Right. So it's,
I know, so it's-
yeah, I mean,
You
it's
want the
annoying
grammar to
too.
get better, and so a lot of times I'll point it out, and say, you know, this principle spelled like this and not like this. But after a while, you know, you want. I
So
don't
maybe
know.
instead of for everybody's, just pick out 3 from the class and say, these are, you know, 3 errors I noticed on your papers. Pay attention to that stuff or something. So ways to grade it, complete or incomplete. Yeah, did they do it? Did they not? I like the check minus, check plus, check thing. I mean, check minus is like you didn't put in any effort into it. Check, you're right where you need to be, and check plus, you did a good job, very good job. Random collection, I mean, you know, just take 5 from your class and look and see what they're doing. Portfolio or journal after several weeks where they collect all that stuff. Brief comments, which I think you do. Again, commenting on the work of the whole class. So we all have those kiosks or whatever they are in the classroom. Just take 3 out of your class and put it on the dot cam and say, you know, this is what this student did. This is what's working well. This is what this student could do more effectively. Have them read each other's peer review. So you're not grading it with a rubric because that'd be too time consuming. It's just, you know, quick. Yep, they did it. Good job. A few comments.
It goes against everything we know as human beings, right? It's against all our instincts to say, I'm going to ignore this grammar. Or I'm just going to say, like, hey, principal, this, when you're using the situation, this is how you spell it. Having the moment when you pay attention to grammar saves your sanity. I'm saying, like, as long as I'm understanding what you're saying, I'm just going to move forward. Because, and the more you do it, the easier it is to do. I'm not advocating grammar doesn't matter, right? I'm saying it doesn't matter necessarily in low stakes so that you can then value it more later on. And as they are practicing this way of thinking, right? The cognitive challenge, more used to doing that they are, I think, and that's not necessarily backed by any data, but I think the easier it is for them to then switch modes and say, I don't have to think about that right now. I can now think about grammar and the things where it matters. Because again, we know the more cognitively taxing the stuff is, the harder it is for them to grasp those science concepts, the less likely they are to pay attention to that grammar.
Doesn't mean they should
I
spell
have
check.
a problem with it
It's true.
because we're working with pre-service teachers. My next semester they're going to be student teaching, and if they're having problems, they're supposed to teach this to their children.
That's fair.
Yeah, so I have a problem with ignoring it. You need to know this, and you need to practice it, and just.
But what's the instructional goal of the task? The instructional goal of low stakes writing is not to fix their prose. The instructional goal of low stakes writing is to foster their cognitive abilities, or they're thinking about a specific topic.
So it's not an argument for not knowing grammar.
Right.
It's an argument for having that instruction and that expectation in its place. And also, we've got how many years? 50, 70 years of research that says, I can identify, we've got lots of students who can say, this is what a comma splice is, this is what it does, this is how it's created, and they look at their paper and they say, I don't have any. So having the knowledge separate from the practice are two different things. And that's frustrating for all of us because it seems like it should be. So I have students who either can't, and I see this both ways in the Writing Center, right, who can't name a subject and a verb, but can say that sentence is wrong and I'm going to fix it doing this. So they don't know what a subject or a verb is, but they have the innate knowledge that that sentence is incomplete and I need to fix it. Or this is what a subject is, this is what a verb is, and I think that sentence is fine, even though it's the same sentence. So they're separate things. So instructing through their actual writing, right, of saying like, okay, this is when you use principle this way, this is when you do it this way, is what's more effective for them in terms of applying what they know. So you can't assume they don't know it.
It's hard.
It's hard.
I still do both. I start
stop
with a positive comment, say, hey, you did a great job in this. You know, this you seem to understand how to apply this concept into the real world. And then say, by the way, principle spelled like this. You know, I still tell them.
And that's the way to get them learning how to think about it.
I can't, it's just me probably, but I can't disassociate my brain when I see that
I
stuff.
can't either. My concern is I have students where I think that no one has ever told them they're wrong. and they're seniors in college. And this is the number one problem that employers are finding is that the college graduates cannot communicate. And, you know, in my field, these documents have to be written. They go to court. They have to be right.
They do.
They have to be right.
I guess from the idea, I don't think I give low stakes writing assignments in the class. So one aspect is to think if you're going to place this into the class and your grading, do you set this up as like 10% of the coursework or of the percentage of the grade if you're doing this a couple times?
You could do it either way. You could do it as part of the project grade, or you could do it as a course grade.
Okay.
And I do both.
Yeah. And I also don't think to my students I'm directly clear with them on like where I'm counting off for grammar and where I'm not. But right, like that's or if they put a politician's name down wrong, right? It's not Barack Obama. Right? This idea is you just like you can't say that. Like you can't go on the news and type that out. And it's just and there are other names. They're not going to mess that up for the next 4 years. But that's okay. Like this thought is that they're and as long as I tell students, I'm like, I wrote that down, but I didn't take off points for it. I just circled it. Mm-hmm. They're sort of okay with it. But at the very beginning, they're like, did I lose 5 points because I put an extra R in his name?
I think that's the point. I don't take off points on those low stakes. I just make sure that they're aware for the next time. I give them 10 points. Okay. I mean, I'll take off points if the content's wrong. Okay. If what they're supposed to be learning about was totally off. But
I felt that sometimes if you add in that comment, they felt like it was the spelling mistake and not the content mistake.
Yeah, so I start with the content, and then if it's enough that I just like is glaring at me, I'm going to say something.
I try to do both. They're writing a big paper in my class, 3 chapters long, and I grade for content, and then I grade for mechanics and stuff. And so there's 2 grades. And then, of course, at the end, I'm trying to figure out, well, how does that combine? So that's always an issue. But I do try to do both.
One of the problems that I've argued this in faculty senate, we can't expect an assistant professor in English to teach our students in one course called composition or whatever to be writers. That's totally unfair. But what happens once they leave that class, of course, and they get into science and history and English courses, we all teach a different format. We have different expectations. We have a different language. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, they're going from maybe I can write a 5-paragraph essay, for lack of a better one, to what does all this mean? I mean, that's not what I had as a freshman. They're expecting to be something different, and they're totally confused.
And that's the genre knowledge, the rhetorical knowledge, the discourse community knowledge. And you're absolutely right that one course, right, we can't expect them, we have to shift our expectations as well, right? Because again, even if they did really well in a 1301, 1302 situation, they are having those new expectations on them that they're having to negotiate. I would have to teach them the expectations again.
We can teach that though, but it doesn't change the principal problem. That doesn't care what discipline you're in. I think that cuts across that.
To address your point, we're moving what we're into in our classes and the English, the freshman level column classes, more of a teaching for transfer style where we don't ask them to do a lot of stuff we don't think they're not going to do in another class. We're getting them more to analyze the types of text they might write in other classes. So it's essentially teaching them how to learn how to write. So I'm suddenly immersed in a new discourse community. How do I determine, how do I analyze what the salient features of that discourse community are? How do I analyze what the salient features of the genres they use in that discourse community are? So it's not, I wrote some papers in freshman comp, I did great. It's, I now have some knowledge I can apply if I change majors. If I'm no longer a history major, I want to be an engineering major. How do I suddenly immerse myself in this new discourse community? Well, you analyze the different genres, what's going on. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but so we're trying to address that problem.
And I think principal problem is, and it's not a solution any of us has, is they don't read enough.
Plus, 18 to 22-year-olds have poor attention to detail.
For sure.
But by the time they're seniors, you'd hope their attention to detail is
Detail
still
is
on.
increasing.
Well, I'll give you some data that supports that. Dallas is a major U.S. city. Dallas has the lowest book purchase of any major U.S. city in the country. So Texans generally don't read. I've gone to workshops with social studies. In fact, I was handing out my book as a door prize. I'm going to forget this. The woman once, she was all excited. And then she said, "Do I have to read this?" I said, "Social studies teacher." And I should have said, "No, I'll take it back." but there was an attitude, and our students are the same way. I do introductory activities right off the bat to get a sense of what they don't know. And again, I'm getting so used to it, I'm not surprised that they don't know all sorts of information because they don't read. And so, where do we begin? Well, kindergarten, obviously, but I mean, we have kids that come to us that are clearly not ready to do the kinds of work that expecting to.
Definitely.
Absolutely. All right, so, and this is great, asking questions, and this is exactly what we always hope for. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get the writing assignments put together to get the writing that you want. The first thing to do is really take a step back from your assignment, right? And really think about what is it that you're wanting students to do. And really think about the language that you're using to help get at that goal. A problem is we often say we want analysis or we want summary, but we don't then go in and really figure out what we mean by that. Because what we mean in history is different than what we mean in education, which is different than what we mean in science. So really figuring out, well, what is analysis? Analysis is engagement with the ideas. What does that mean? And really figuring out what it is that you want them to get from their project, and then using the most specific term you can use. I tell students who come in the Writing Center that I don't want to hear them talk about flow, because what does that mean? Does that mean transitions? Does it mean sentence to sentence transitions? Does it mean paragraph to paragraph transitions? That doesn't tell me what they want to learn. So I ask them to be a little bit more specific and to do that. And they always get annoyed and roll their eyes, but that's okay. So the more specific you can be in terms of what goals you want them to come out with and what language you use to get to those goals, the better off your students are going to be. And this seems obvious, but again, these are really common terms. It seems obvious to know what analysis is, what summary is, but it's not. And that's really one of the things that we keep coming back to again and again. One of the things that we hear all the time, and through the Writing Center a lot, is plagiarism. Students are cheating. We have some things that we can do as we set up our assignments to minimize the plagiarism. The more course-specific your class is, the fact that they can't buy, so they can always buy a custom created paper, and if they have the money to do that, more power to them. Not more power to them, right? Because that's bad. But you can't stop that, right? But you can't stop student A from giving their paper to student B because it's the same assignment from one class to the other, from one section to the other. Right? So the more class specific it is, and the more you encourage them to interpret that through their own lens of curiosity, and curiosity is a tough thing to get, especially in younger students. I'm taking a history class because I have to, or maybe that's just what I hear all the time. I'm only in English because I have to be, because you require it to graduate. The more narrow the focus and the more narrow their interest, the less likely it is student A is giving to student B. As I said, we're never going to stop them buying assignments. That's just how it is. The more you change or rotate your assignments, the less likely it is from last semester to give it to student to this semester to the next semester. And that's hard to do because I finally isolated my assignments, but then I get another one, and so I have a few years between when I offer this particular interpretation of this issue, as well as scaffolding your assignments. What I see most often in the Writing Center, and of course, this is a particular subset of students, is not that they are trying to cheat by cutting and pasting, it's that they are unaware that is cheating, or they're unaware that this particular instance, I know that it's cheating to cut and paste, but because I put my beginning word and ending word on it, that's not cutting and pasting. or they think they don't know what the difference common knowledge is. So the more you can scaffold in places to catch that early and to address it rather than when it comes in the final paper, the better off you're going to be. And it can be really simple as far as we're practicing, everyone has one, this is a shared reading and we're all going to paraphrase this one paragraph. Well, I can look at it very quickly and say, nope, too similar or quite different. So it doesn't have to be all of the different assignments, right? It can be, and you can then rotate which article you're doing that in from semester to semester. So it's not you getting 12 different assignments. The more specific your assignment is, the less likely you are to get the plagiarism. And these are some examples that we found. Write a research paper about the cause of the Civil War. Well, of course, I can get 12 of those, right? I can Google cause of the Civil War and find papers. And I don't know why students think that we can't Google the same way they can, but sometimes we do. So the more specific, contrast the narrative of the Civil War we discussed from the history monograph, so getting those specific readings in the class, with the narratives from 3 of the following books, and we would list 3 other books. So that would have the shared versus the unique, which again will limit the plagiarism because there are options that are happening there. Based on these 4 books, what are the authors' interpretations of the economic causes of the Civil War? Which argument presents the most convincing evidence and is the most nuanced? So you're really looking at, and this one really looks at, so we're looking at the author's interpretations, we're looking for evidence, we're looking for nuance of argument. That's really asking to look at really specific things. Again, if you give this assignment every semester with the same 4 books, you're going to run the risk of getting what was submitted a semester before, even 2 semesters before. I haven't heard of it here, but you all know where I was previously, the fraternities had file cabinets that students could go into and pick out what paper they wanted to turn in, organized by major. And I have pretty convincing evidence that exists. I don't think it exists here, but was that a thought? Oh, no. It's upsetting, yes. Obviously, the more you scaffold, the more likely your students are to be successful because they're going to be doing little pieces and you're going to be giving them even minor feedback, right? That scaffolding can be in class, can be out of class. It can be write an introductory paragraph and then you look at it and then hand it to your neighbor and read it. What do you think the paper's about, right? That takes 10 minutes of class time, but it really helps them frame their ideas. Also, if they have to do some writing in class, they're not going to copy and paste it from anywhere because they don't have the opportunity. Obviously, scaffolding is the stuff that you already know. Building on the last one, moving from simple to complex, moving section by section with your chapters, right? In the first chapter, you're going to submit a draft, and I'm going to look for these 3 things. And the next one, you're going to do, I'm going to look for these things. The idea of moving from the reviews to the conclusions, we don't want to start with their conclusions because they haven't read enough yet. And that's something that we see all the time when we see poor organization is students have done one draft and they have not known, they thought they knew what they're going to write about, but they sort of figured out something else and then they were only doing one draft. So they didn't go back and see, oh, I started with the thesis that's about X, but I'm really writing about Y. And so if you're scaffolding, right, if you're looking through, they have to have a thesis and then a supporting paragraph, and you look at that, even if it's 5 sentences, that's going to make sure they're on track. They're doing better writing. Again, none of this is in any way earth-shaking. You all know this. I tell my students that I do drafts. So I grade an early draft and a late draft. And then if they want to do revisions, they can do revisions. Now that's within the 1302 class, so that's specific writing class. I tell them I give them those deadlines because I know that they're going to do it the night before. And if they're going to spend 2 nights on it, that's better than 1 night on it. Students tend to think that they need to have a deadline to write. I'm guilty of that too, so it's okay. So having those multiple deadlines, right, having those things that are due, it keeps them from being overwhelmed. It helps them not procrastinate. And a lot of plagiarism we see comes from procrastination. It's, this paper is due in 3 hours, and I thought it would take me 1 hour, and I'm now 2.5 in, and I'm not anywhere close to done. I'm just going to have to pull some things in. And so it's a desperation act rather than a I don't want to do the work act because they don't budget their time because they didn't know how to. So scaffolding helps prevent that again in the future as well. And then what you all really care about, responding to writing. Again, the scaffolding is nothing new, but we are huge proponents of it. The more, and it doesn't have to be a huge investment in your time, it's spreading that time out over the whole semester rather than in one chunk of time.
And if you want to keep the scaffolded assignments as a portfolio,
Yes.
I guess quick question more towards your preference. Do you leave the students with the responsibility of keeping their own portfolio in a binder, or do you do that and keep the class together?
I
And
make
sort of
them do
distribute
it.
them?
I see part of my job as teaching first-year students is teaching them how to be college students. So part of that is keeping up with stuff and marking them down when they don't.
Okay.
But if
I'm
you
just curious, like in case if a paper's lost, then the paper's
then it's lost. When I've switched to all of my papers and everything is submitted through Blackboard. So when they tell me, so even if I have to print out and collect the hard copies, if they tell me, well, I don't have that or I've saved over it, I say, well, you submitted in Blackboard, you can print it from there. And so that does keep, we don't lose anything when it's submitted in Blackboard. We don't lose the whole thing, right? There's no, my computer crashed and I had nothing. So, well, your computer crashed and now you have draft 1.
Yeah, maybe not the comments.
And maybe is not the whole thing that you spent 2 hours working on, but it is enough that you're not at 0. And so when I get the email like, well, I couldn't finish my paper because my computer crashed, I can say, I'm sorry. You have draft 1 that you could start from. Oh, I didn't know I could do that. Yeah. Again, I work with first years all the time. They are precious snowflakes. When you're responding to writing, the key to not making yourself crazy is not responding to everything. And it's not saying that everything doesn't matter. It says, this is what I'm focusing on right now. So the various ways to focus that are on content, right? Does it satisfy the assignment? Is the evidence appropriate? What is the quality of critical thinking? Those are the main ideas that I think about when I think about addressing content, right? How well does this do what I want it to do? And that goes back to your very specific instructions and your very specific language that you're using. After content, another area is style. How much are they writing within the discourse community of my field? Are they, do they have the thinking, but they're being too informal? Are they being too formal? Are they being, are the sentences clear and sophisticated? Are their mechanical errors minimal? One of the things that I think about when I'm writing is when I'm grading writing is a comma splice is one error, no matter how many times it happens. So if I have one error that I'm making over and over and over again, that's different than I'm having 12 errors that I'm making each one twice, right? So that's when we say minimal, we want it to be clean, right? We want to look at style, we want to look at usage, but we want to focus on one feeling of understanding versus multiple failures of understanding. So I have no idea what a comma splice is, and I do it all the time. Well, that's one error. It can have a big impact, but it's one error versus comma splices and introductory clause issues and subject-verb agreement and misused words. And so that's one of the things that I think about as I'm evaluating. There's lots of ways of marking that take less time. And the one that we use most often is minimal marking, right? Where you just sort of note where there are issues. And then I know one of the things that we all get fed up with is I spent so much time grading your writing and you don't give a crap. And you don't do anything with it. And all you do is, since I put those commas in, you just go through and do that. And that's all that you do to fix your paper. This makes them look for the errors themselves, right? To say there's an issue in sentence 1, there's 2 in line 2, and there's 1 in line 3. They have to then go look at those and try to figure them out. When they can't, excuse me, then they come talk to you. The ones who actually care about doing well and learning will come and speak with you. And that conversation will maybe take half an hour to an hour, but you've committed that time to a student who's actually invested in improving, rather than 60 students who are not invested in improving. So it's giving the chance for everyone to learn, but really investing your time in the ones who really want to learn and do better.
Really good getting informal groups outside class.
Absolutely.
Talk about each other's.
Absolutely.
Papers.
So that's a group that's an excellent. I hadn't thought about that. But a chance for group work in terms of helping each other find where the errors are, the problems.
I was going to ask about that because I've toyed with this idea of putting them in little groups of 4 and having them share, little pieces that they're doing. but some of them are so bad, I'm worried about insulting students, embarrassing students. I don't know if I can ethically do that.
And that's a fair concern. But also making them take ownership for their work by having them know, and it's not a surprise, right? It's not, and today I'm going to put students' work on the camera, haha, surprise. But saying like, look, this is an expectation this semester, is that you're going to share your work with each other, and that's just how it is. Having them have that responsibility and that knowing that they might have a more public audience than just you sometimes really helps increase the quality.
Is it
I
bad
do that.
because they didn't put any effort into it, or was it bad because they just don't know what they're doing? If it was bad because they didn't put any effort into it, maybe the public statement will have some positive impact.
Well, there's always 4 or 5 students in this senior class that, in fact, to one girl, I said, well, I understand because obviously English is not your first language. And she says, oh, yes, it is my first language. I'm like, okay, well, let's dive into that one. Because I couldn't understand what she was saying or writing. Or saying is okay, but writing. So I've already put them in groups for another debate topics thing. So I could use that same group, because they've had to write a 60-second elevator speech.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love for them to be able to share that. I just don't want to embarrass them. Because this one young man has already sent me 2 drafts. So I've already torn it up twice. But maybe peer work would, I just think he just doesn't know.
I've got a dilemma. First of all, I appreciate what you folks do at the Writing Center. I send my students over on a regular basis. I begin with their first character sketch. I teach an education course on a sketch on my favorite teacher. And I write them a note. I said, you have enough problems with writing from every other assignment. You need to go to the Writing Center. So they do. Number one, the folks that work with my students will always contact me via email.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is I forward that email to those students and say, I'm happy you went over there. And that keeps them going. My problem is their papers improve, but I'm not sure whether they actually know what they've done or whether it's been the assistance that they need to make that shift. So if, and when they leave the university, if they have to write a letter or a short essay, it's really hard to know whether they have the skills to do it. And that's a tough issue. And I don't want you folks to be responsible, but you are, though, for the mechanical stuff and all that stuff. I would love just to read the content, try to figure out if it's a good paper.
That'd be nice.
So it becomes like a collaborative effort, I think. So.
It is collaborative in that the tutors are reading and commenting and giving feedback. That's the challenge of Writing Center research, is how much is the student learning and how much is the tutor contributing. We can't know. I just read a really interesting study about students revising with the help of tutors and without. And tutors didn't change the kinds of revisions, but they changed the number that students made. So I think it's more making them aware rather than giving them, that's the best data I've seen that says the Writing Center is not doing it for them or not.
What's the quote about marking an educated person is knowing what you don't know?
Yes.
So maybe if going to the Writing Center helps them figure out what they don't know, and they get on their job, they'll seek out someone who's a better writer than them and get feedback from them.
One would hope.
Yeah. No, I think they come believing they're excellent writers. Because
Yeah, that happens a lot.
well, they've gotten A's, have been 8 classes, and all of a sudden they show up here and whoa, what happened?
And students tell me, I make A's on my papers. What's wrong with you?
Exactly.
And I said, well, are you saying this is right? Well, no, that's not right.
That's true.
So, no.
And part of it is having those.
On the slide before, what was the underline?
So underlines mean various things in minimal marking. Sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it's just a sentence you want to draw attention to. It's really the marks on the side that are characteristic of minimal marking.
Like you show this to your students and say, this is how I'm going to grade your paper. If you see these lines, this is what this means. They know.
Absolutely.
They get that first paper back with that, what they have to do with it.
Yes. So I don't just hand this back and figure it out. We're using minimal marking and this is the goal that it accomplishes. And And this is why we're using it. And again, if you don't understand or you can't figure it out, that's when you come and chat with me, and that's when we'll spend some time on it.
Do you think it takes you longer though to grade like that? Because if I had to count the errors per line and put them out to the side with numbers.
Those aren't numbers, they're little X's, aren't they?
Yes, they're X's.
Minimal marking just means there's an error within the sentence that you need to fix. We're not counting errors. Yeah, that'd be crazy.
Yeah, so you
That would be crazy. No, I don't do this. This particular example has sort of multiples, and it's fine. If I notice something, I do a dot and I move on. That's really all that I do. So I don't count, and it does really save a lot of time. Again, when I do invest the time, it's in the students who care enough to come and actually come to my office and talk to me about it. And another thing to do that you can do is patterns of errors, and this works particularly well if you're grading online, although if you're old school and you have your highlighter, right? So anytime I see particular, a comma splice or a style error, I'll highlight it in color. And then at the end, I'll say, okay, so green ones are style errors. In general, your style errors are about being too informal. Every time you see a yellow highlight, it's about a comma splice. A comma splice is when you're joining two sentences with a comma. It's not appropriate. And then you have them go back through and then correct those. So you see the patterns. This is, again, like I say, comma splices. If you keep making comma splice errors, that's really one error made over and over again. This helps you think about that. This takes a little while to get my brain into this mode, which is why I don't do this as often. But it is really useful for helping students sort of see, when they see things are highlighted and they see how often it comes up, that's actually really, for visual learners, it's really impactful.
This is what I've developed on my own in those papers. It's the color coding. And then I've got all these, of course I have to supply a color code key to the student, but then I can just look at these and see how many yellows and how many greens and how many reds. I use reds for the grammar.
So an example section is another way of, so if they have persistent errors across the entire paper, you take one or two paragraphs and you really comment on everything you can within those two paragraphs. And then you say, and now it's up to you to apply these things to the rest of the paper.
I've got to start doing that because but I can't make myself stop, in fact, I'll draw a line and say, I'm quitting reading here.
So you don't quit. I don't advocate quitting reading. I feel like your students have put enough effort in to turn it in. I'm not going to quit reading, but I quit commenting.
Quit commenting
here. Yes, I don't know. Yeah, quit reading. But I've had those comments in my papers as a student, and I was like, you quit reading? This is page 2. I've got 6 more pages. And my good stuff is in the last pages.
A different dynamic here.
Sure.
I mean, if she's trying to prepare students who need to get documents very specifically right for court.
For sure.
And they're not. I would even say I didn't start reading, or this paper's doesn't meet the standards. Turn it into me when it does.
For sure.
And see what happens.
That's totally fair.
I read the first 3 paragraphs fairly carefully, and if it's fine, I keep on reading. If it isn't, so stop, and then say, go to the writing center. Last semester I had 84 students, and I do a lot with writing, and so I don't have time to read. So it's first 3 paragraphs. If you're not doing well, and then they'll come back and then they improve. So.
And sometimes the wake up and pay attention is an important moment. I won't lie and say I've never done it. Marginal comments are what we all sort of do, right? As you're reading and you think, that doesn't make sense, you write in the margin, that doesn't make sense. I don't understand your connection between source A and source B. So you're responding as a reader. A lot of times as I read, a paragraph and a half later, I'll say, oh, that answers that question, but I'll leave those all in so they'll see as somebody's reading it, this is how it comes across.
Track changes is the biggest invention ever, because then later you'll say, oh, now I understand what you meant up here, and I'll point out, your reader was lost. You never lose your reader.
Asking questions, so I don't understand how you're using the term X, Y, or Z here. You keep saying, sorry, I keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Good and bad examples, when it's important to show them as you're reading, like, oh, as a reader, I settled and was like here with you. That's an important thing to point out as well as you do marginal comments. End comments, I use marginal comments and end comments. You don't have to do both. But the marginal comments are, as a reader, the end comments are summing up as an overview. I talk about the compliment. I've heard it called two things. I've heard it called the compliment sandwich, where you start with this is something that you did well, and then we have the big section that is, these are the main things to work on, and you pick one or two, and then you end with, I see you progressing, or you're critical thinking, or so you have sort of that sandwich. I never heard it, but somebody the other day referred to it as the shit sandwich, and I thought that was fun too. So, again, it's hard for all of us to focus our attention, right? Because we see the breadth of what students need to work on. Sometimes that's overwhelming. Like, there's so much going on here, I can never, ever fix it, right? Whereas if we give them no more than 3 areas to work on, they can work on those 3 areas. And that's something that my students get really annoyed with me, because I'll do this. I'll focus on the 3 areas, and they'll turn it in. I'll be like, that's great. It's a B+. I'm like, but I did everything you said. I said, you did. But that was only 3 of the many, many things you can work on. So now you have other things to work on, because writing is always able to be improved. We just stop working on writing. We're never done with
Your
writing.
students submit their work on Blackboard, or do they hand in a hard copy to you?
For papers, it's in Blackboard.
And do you ever do any kind of verbal feedback in Blackboard to them?
I haven't.
I've been thinking about, especially with Canvas coming out, it's, there's a button we should be able to hit, and then we can actually just talk to them about their paper and just say, this is what I see, instead of having to maybe go through and make all those notes.
I haven't done it, but I've always wanted to. So hopefully with Canvas, it'll be a little bit. With Blackboard, I find it unwieldy to even figure out how to insert them. So.
Well, with Blackboard, I have to download the paper, because you simply can't do it.
No, you can't.
It's just too limited.
Yeah, then I scan them back.
Yeah.
So that's commenting. Grading without commenting. Again, you don't have to have these comments on all of them. You can save your time and energy for the students who actually want that really detailed feedback. The minimal marking is commenting, but it's limited commenting. Using rubrics is really important. Having a rubric and having it given to students before they start writing, which I'm guilty of giving it to them after they've started writing, and they're like, where did all this come from? I was like, oh, I thought I instructed that. Guides, but with rubrics, they guide me in what I'm commenting on, right? So if I only have these 3 sections, those are the only things that I'm going to pay most attention to. And if I'm only marking on a rubric sheet, for instance, then I'm not going to waste a bunch of time doing things that I'm not counting as much, or I want to count but I know I haven't instructed on. I do use rubrics mostly with final submissions, so they have them all along, ideally, but I will only grade on them with the final submission. And again, that's a really quick thing, since I've seen so many drafts. Shared with students before. So this is an example of a rubric. So you're picking the areas, the research quality, the structure, the clear formal sentences, and the APA formatting, and then the areas where they're getting their point values. And where it says description or example, that's where you would insert a description or example, not having students read each other's writing is really important. And again, the more they have content areas to look for, the more productive they're going to be. The less you say, well, do you like it, do you not like it? But the more, what's the thesis? What's the main supporting point? Those, having that directed kind of peer response is where you're going to get really useful peer response. And people always say, but it's the blind leading the blind. If they create this really not up to par writing, how can they help someone else? Just because they're not able to execute doesn't mean they're not able to recognize what's going on. So peer response is absolutely a good idea. It's something that's really beneficial. And again, it gives them that real audience of, like, if I'm ashamed, but I can hide, Dr. Hartstein's going to see this, going to be fine. Whereas I know I'm going to do peer response, and Matt, my friend Matt, is going to see it. Okay. Some other tips that really help is having students read aloud from a hard copy. So if all they do is I like to have them bring a hard copy and then make everyone go sit in a corner and just read it out loud to themselves. And then we come back and talk about how many things they noticed as they read. And they're always amazed at what they noticed. So they think, well, I don't need to do that, or I'm going to read it slowly in my head, pretend like read it out loud in my head, even though it's not physically out loud. I totally did that. I thought it was good enough. It wasn't. Another tip, and I am always sad to say, like, I always had the advice to read from the end to the beginning, and I was like, well, what's the use in that? And I was like a master's student when I realized that's the last sentence, and then the next to last sentence, and the next to last sentence. But that's an editing technique for students to get them out of what they're saying and into how they're saying it. And again, having them practice it and then come back and sort of have a moment of discussion of, oh, those I didn't realize that word wasn't making sense, is really productive to convince them to do it. This is our last slide, and this is our, there's 1,001 resources on the WAC Clearinghouse that are all free. And so there's activities, there's articles. So instead of collecting various things, we say, explore the wide wonder of what they've done there. We do still have 10 minutes, so more thoughts and questions and ideas sharing. Is there another slide? That's the last one.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
What are the limits of the Writing Center? What are they supposed to do and not supposed to do?
I'm not sure how to answer. Not because I don't have clear limits, but because the idea is that they will read so students are supposed to bring their assignment as well as whatever writing they have. The tutors will read the assignment and read the writing, hopefully with the student, right? So reading it out loud or reading it together or whatever. And then the student will have questions as they go through. So the student will bring a guiding idea. I want to focus on grammar. I want to focus on thesis statement. I want to focus on what have you. And then the tutor will work with the student on asking the right questions to help the student figure out how to address that issue. That's sort of the model. That's the goal. Of course, sometimes students come in and say, I need help with grammar, and that's all they ask for. And really, it's having cohesive thinking. So really what the tutors do is ask questions, identify where the student really needs work, and then provide resources for that. So within that, I don't know how to answer the limits.
Well, I don't know where to focus, because I'll get a student and I'll look at the papers and there's some very obvious errors, and I'll point those out, and they say, well, I went to the Writing Center. They didn't say that was wrong. I go, oh, well, then I don't know whether the Writing Center was supposed to have caught that. And then I had a student, and an APA reference page was not alphabetical. And, well, they didn't say to do that. I would think the Writing Center knows APA. So I just don't know how far to push.
So they do know APA, they do know MLA, they do know Chicago, and on top of that, all of the resources are there. So I train them to look those up. That being said, I also train them to focus on three-ish things. So it may be that just didn't get there. Okay. On top of that, I find that
I don't know what's focused on and what's not.
Right, and there's not a good way to know. And there's a big difference I found between what the tutor might say and what the student might hear. And that's with all of us, right? That's a human nature thing. But the tutor may say, like, we're going to focus on your in-text citations. And the student may hear, well, that means my citation page is fine. And what the tutor is saying is, this is worse. So it's hard to say.
Is there a log or something that they fill out and say, these are the 3 things we worked on?
So they do.
Faculty wanted to check.
So students have to give permission for faculty to have access to any of their records for the Writing Center. So you can't just go in and be like, I need my students. What we do, and you get the emails, is they do write up at the end sort of a summary of what they've done. Sometimes they're more detailed, sometimes they're less. My student workers have 50 minutes to do the tutorial and the reporting of it. So if the student requests that you receive that, you'll send it right on. If you have a student who's come through and you're like, something has gone wrong and you want to know more about it, that's when you call me and I can see have they given permission, and if they have, then we can go through and look at what's gone on. Anytime you have concerns, whether it's APA just keeps coming back wrong, do we need to do a training on it? Do we need to do, or are the students not hearing it, or what's going on? We can do that as well. It's hard to say. Again, we look for the patterns, right? It's hard to say, well, that student just didn't hear something, right? Versus, I've got 3 that are saying this came out, and well, then we need to do something about that. Or if it's inconsistent errors, right? So one, the APA, it's not alphabetical, and the next one, the APA is this particular comma is wrong. Well, that's just an error that I need to address with the
So I'm
individual
thinking
tutor.
when I tell a student you should go to the writing center, I should add on to that, and you should tell them to focus on 1, 2, 3.
And that would be really helpful.
Okay.
So the short answer is yes. The long answer is I can't always tell you. But if you ever have a student who said, I went and they gave me this bad advice, please contact me. And we'll look at 1, if they went, and 2, if I can talk to you about it. And then 3, we can start diagnosing where things went wrong. I'm going to back my tutors. I'm just going to tell you I'm going to back my tutors because that's my job. But I believe you when you're saying these things are coming in. So we will negotiate where things need to be addressed. But I try really hard not to be defensive.
Well, it's undoubtedly just a communication.
It is. But if we can work on how to communicate with criminal justice students better, then we need to do that. If we need to work on what education students need, then we need to do that for sure, so we can set them up to be successful.
Do you have enough resources in the Writing Center for the amount of students that we have here now? Because we've been increasing students over the years. I feel sometimes that I overload you.
You do?
I don't know. But I'm not the only person. I think if that's an issue, it's something that needs to be addressed at a higher level.
So I've been speaking with the provost. And we have some agreements.
You have?
I'd say,
okay.
Well, not agreements, but we have some guidelines for our discussions. The spring semester, I'll say, is a lot slower than the fall semester. So if you've got students who need to come on down this semester, send them on down.
Okay.
When is the writing center open? Like, what are the hours?
So it's 9 to 6, Monday through Thursday, and then 9 to 3 on Friday. And we also have drop-in hours at the library from 8 to 10, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night.
Pretty much all time.
Pretty much normal business hours were open.
I'm going to ask a bad thing.
No.
So I don't know the catalog or curriculum so well. So do you have upper division, like class in technical writing? So if we were to
We
ask
do
students
not
to write
have
this
an upper
reports?
level. We have none for people who aren't English majors. This semester we have 1 senior seminar that's in technical writing, but it's only for English majors. Next fall there'll be 2311, which will be technical writing, mostly for the engineering students, maybe some of the nursing students. But we're trying to get there. Yes.
Good.
There should be upper level professional writing classes.
There used to be an English 3390 advanced grammar, or something advanced
Yes.
writing, I think. And it was wonderful. She sticks students in that all the time.
I thought even if it didn't have to be like political science related, but I was in a different school, but one of the things I thought was amazing was that a guy that had, I guess, more trained in technical writing came in and just sort of blew up the students' 2-page, like we did a fact sheet. And he was able to cut out the words that they didn't need and strengthen their argument. And he didn't change any of their words, right? And it was just sort of compacting all of their arguments. And I thought that, although that may not be a class at some level, that was a particular skill that, by the 3rd week of school, students had already progressed so much in that writing. So I was kind of looking out for if there was any other.
I think we're hoping to increase those offerings, but it's a slow process.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, if you have writing things that you want to happen in your class for all your students, that's something that the Writing Center does that is not super well known. I will work with you to figure out what your students need and what the Writing Center can offer, and then we will come into your class and do a workshop, or it can be an extra credit workshop. Not a lot of people, we haven't done a lot of them because a lot of people ask for them, and I'm too busy to say like, you need this, let's do it. But if that's something that you need, if you're noticing things in your students, that's something that we offer. All you have to do is contact me, and I will do my very best to. There's only one of me, so if everyone does it, then I get overwhelmed. But
keep going.
I'm happy to make that happen if it's a need and a desire.
You know, like on that second slide, the one that had genre and something else, you know, frankly, that's the least of my worries at this point.
This one?
Yes. Genre and rhetorical and just, I don't know what those are either. But I just want a subject and a verb that agree, and I don't want them to put all these pronouns in when you have no idea what the pronoun refers to.
Have you considered how much volume you give when the student's writing? Like, that's one of the things we think about is, what's the right volume? Because, right, we know we can't fix this. We can't fix that in one semester. We can't fix it essentially over 4 years. So what's the right amount of volume to help students who aren't very good at writing, at least by the time they graduate, are better at writing? So maybe less is more sometimes, I don't know. Less work for you, but more intense work on their part on, you know.
Well, I don't know how much is too much either, but I break it up into these little pieces.
Yeah.
So, you know, hopefully that, you know, so they've got their 60-second elevator speech, and then thankfully I've got the Career Services Center helping me this time. They're doing resumes and cover letters, and then they do a group writes a paper together, and that's always a nightmare because somebody in the group doesn't do it,
right,
and everybody else takes it up. But we're supposed to teach group work.
Peer response is excellent group work.
Well, and I've got this group, so now I'm thinking I can do their little 60-second elevator speech, and I can put them in their little groups, and they can do that. And they will have their little group paper to work on.
I was about to say we shouldn't prepare them, right? I know that they will have collaboratively written things as they enter the workforce, but the stakes are different then, right? Like, I can absorb a failing grade. I don't really care that much, but I can't absorb being fired.
Right. Once you get in the workplace, things become real, and then the importance of all this stuff you're supposed to learn in college becomes more apparent.
Well, and I remind them of that. You know, this is, what if you were writing for your boss or the board of directors? What would happen? Somebody has to do it.
That's like with that volume issue. I used to require 5 to 7 pages, and I've dropped it to 3 to 5 because it gets to a point where if it's bad on the 3rd page, it's going to be bad on the 7th, so there's no sense in them doing it.
Exactly.
I just finished the book over the weekend, and Sea of the Salt, and the author did such an incredible job. It's about the sinking of a ship after World War II full of refugees. But the way she did it is she only had 2-page vignettes. There were several major characters, and you follow them from Russia through Poland to the Baltic Sea to the boat, and it's just 2 pages. So Joanna would say her story at this point, and the other. And it occurred to me like, wow, you know, what's wrong with 2 pages if they do it well? And that gives me the time to really pay attention to that and do a bunch of those rather than just 4 or 5, 5 to 7 page things that really.
For Stephanie, the person who wasn't here today, she's really a big fan of that. So shorter assignments for exactly the reasons you just said.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah.
Absolutely.
Barbara, it's a great story.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
In style of writing, one of the things that's also interesting, we're asking people to sort of respond more to the news, and I've sort of realized at the same time I've asked students not to finish out paragraphs and lift out quotes from individuals, and then I come to realize, and here I am reading the Dallas Morning News, Washington Post, and I'm seeing the same thing. And so I am saying that here I am asking them to read this, and then I'm asking them not to write that way. Do you have, in that perspective, you're giving advice, is there a tip you have for me to sort of tell them that, of course, they're not writing,
So I think
mixing in
that's-
the reporter, author.
That's the genre, right? So news writing is very different than academic writing. And so having examples of the news stories and saying, okay, so here's where they're pulling this whole chunk out and putting it there. Now let's look at an academic piece and see how they use the source material. And you see how we've summarized what they've said, or we've paraphrased, and we've woven it into these ways. You're reading mostly news sources, but you're writing more academic sources. Which patterns are you going to follow?
I've had students that, and they tell me they've been taught this way in a junior college. You just take a bunch of quotes and put quotation marks around it, and you just cite it, and you just string a bunch of quotes together, and there's your paper. And it's so bad that I tell them this is unreasonable on my part, but you're not allowed to use quotes.
That was not plagiarism.
It's not plagiarism, but it's not their paper.
I know.
And these quoted sentences will be some inane, commonplace nothing. I mean, there's no reason to quote that.
So the metaphor that I use, well, my friend uses it and I stole it from him, giving credit. Who's driving the bus? Your paper is the bus. Who's driving it? Are you driving it?
Yes.
Or are you letting some other source drive it? And if the other source is driving it, where is your opinion in that? Where is your perspective? Perspective is a better word. And that sometimes is a really useful metaphor. Like, if all it is quotes, who's driving? Are you driving? No.
I think they use it as a way to validate what they're saying, but I don't want it that way.
And our students, I think, have a very hard time of differentiating between a research scholarly opinion and what they believe. And so, I think that whatever they believe, right? Republicans are saving the world, or Democrats are saving the world, right? Well, I believe that. Now, I don't have anything to back that up. So whatever I think I can support from my quotes is what I'm going to say. And so they don't understand that nuance, I don't think. And so I think that's where a lot of the overquoting comes from, is they are trying to see, I have backing it, that's good. Well, but you haven't actually said anything. What are you backing up? Who's driving?
I always tell my students, like, sometimes I have these students who try to write, and when you read it, it's this a lot of jargon, and I tell them, it needs to be readable. I need to understand what you're saying. It needs to be personable. Mm-hmm. And so I want it academically written, but I also want it to be easily understood by the common person that reads it. Mm-hmm. So that's something I've really had to work on, because I think they cite a lot of people and they stick a lot of stuff in there, and it just doesn't have that feeling that it's theirs. Like I said, who's driving the bus?
Or sometimes if they even know what they just put in there.
And that's tough for them, because if they've been taught at all, they've been taught to be objective, for a person typically. And then to ask them to come up with their own, not opinions, but their own sense of the situation and incorporate it in an academic setting. That's the skill that you learn over time. It's hard for a 19-year-old, I think. They can be very personal, get totally dead wrong at one level. They can be very objective at another and still be terribly written because of the job, I don't know that. And it's time to bring those two together, I think.
Reading it out loud helps with that. It really does. Because when they start hearing and they hear where they're stumbling and they hear the difference
Part
between.
of that is growth, too.
Yeah.
They're learning to think and write in an academic manner. So it's not going to be perfect.
I still read all my papers out loud that I submit to journals.
Absolutely.
I mean, I have, it's just something I have to
It
do.
really makes a difference, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's even better if I have somebody who I'm reading it out loud to. So they don't have to say anything, but they circle when I change words and I didn't notice, because of course our brains are
And nobody wants to hear me read it.
amazing. That's what I say. But I have very few people who I can do that with, but I have a few friends who we could do that in grad
I
school.
tried that with my husband with my dissertation years ago, and I could tell he tuned it out after the first few words.
Helps you in the field. Well, I was going to say, I know we're past our time, and I know we started late. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.